All right, so now we are on part three now. Part three, salvation and divine favored ashore. So we on the last part of the story here of looking at Jeremiah and looking at how God used Jeremiah for his plan. All right, through all this chaos and craziness that was going on, God was using Jeremiah. All right, and so here the passage, it says first that God has not finished speaking through Jeremiah. It is difficult to believe for good things while in the midst of catastrophe. But because Jeremiah had heard from God, he was able to look past his circumstances and see that all was not lost. God was still working through him and his prophecies. All right. And so we're going to use today for a text, Jeremiah, the 32nd chapter. We're going to look at the 36th through the 41st verse. Okay, so Jeremiah, the 32nd chapter, but this time we're moving a little bit further and we're looking at the 36th verse through the 41st. And it says, "You are saying about this city, by the sword, famine, and plague, it will be given into the hands of the king of Babylon. But this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I will surely gather them from all the lands where I banished them in my furious anger and great wrath. I will bring them back to this place and let them live in safety. They will be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them singleness of heart and action, so that they will always fear me, and that all will then go well for them and for their children after them. I will make an everlasting covenant with them. I will never stop doing good to them, and I will inspire them to fear me, so that they will never turn away from me. I will rejoice in doing them good and will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and soul." All right, so here's the end of the story. A good ending, right? A good ending. And so here, in the last section of Jeremiah, 32nd verse, 36 through 44th verse, Jeremiah expanded on the significance of the prophetic actions described in the preceding account. He explained that the Babylonian Empire, though devastating, would be of limited duration. The Lord promised, "I will certainly bring my people back again from all the countries where I will scatter them in my fury. I will bring them back to this very city and let them live in peace and safety." Earlier in the book, God had promised through Jeremiah that the exile will last for 70 years. Many scholars calculate the 70-year period from the year that Nebuchadnezzar annexed Judah to the Babylonian Empire in 605 BC to the year that the first exiles began returning to Judah under the Persian king Cyrus the Great. In 586 BC, when Jeremiah performed the symbolic prophecy described in this chapter, many of his countrymen had already been in exile for a number of years. Daniel and his three friends had been taken to Babylon in 605 BC, and Ezekiel had been exiled in 597 BC, along with King Jehoiakim and thousands of other inhabitants of Jerusalem. God was not going to leave his people in captivity forever. He would someday bring them back to their homeland, even though many of those who were exiled would die in exile. But the day will come when God will give them one heart and one purpose: to worship me forever. God had chosen them to worship him, and he would not only bring them back to their homeland, but would give them a heart to worship him in spite of their previous rebellion. The portion of God's message to the people mirrors the consolation Jeremiah reported in chapter 31, cementing that God will bring them out. They will be his people and he will be their God. God's heart for his people is especially expressed there in Jeremiah, the 31st chapter, the 18th through the 20th, a passage some believe to be the Old Testament background for the parable of the prodigal son. In verse 20, we read, "Is not Israel still my son, my darling child, says the Lord? I often have to punish him, but I still love him. That's why I long for him and surely will have mercy on him. This is God's heart for all of his wandering children. He takes no pleasure in their suffering, but yearns for their return to the safety of his grace. His chastisement is redemptive and restorative, not vindictive or cruel. All right. And so here, God did punish them for their actions. But like he says, I still love them. I just want them to come back to me. And that's just like a mother's love, right? A mother or father love their children, but every now and then they got to discipline them to get them back on the right track. And here, that's what God was doing. Okay, he wasn't just punishing them just to punish them. They wasn't obeying, they wasn't listening, they wasn't following the rules. So God felt like, I need to punish them. All right. And then now God is bringing them right back to him to show that he loves them. This is why I did this. I need y'all to be with me, to come with me. I don't need you over there worshiping an Asher pole or worshiping Baal or some of these other gods that you all created. Like, no, I need y'all to come to me and follow me. So the question here, it says, how does God's mercy, promise of mercy to hold his people in the Old Testament impact how you view your own relationship with God? Think about your own personal relationship with God. God ever had to punish you for something? Yes, God did. All of us, because we are not perfect. Yes, God did. Maybe you was going down the wrong track and God had to, and you was just stubborn and want to do what you want to do. And then God had to punish you, give you a little spanking there to get you back on track. Okay. And that's exactly what God was doing here with the people. So once again, the question is asking, how does God's promise of mercy to his people in the Old Testament impact how you view your own relationship with God? And so it should impact your own personal view with God, your own relationship with God, that whenever you do get off track, and if you being stubborn and being naive and having so much pride that you won't bow down and follow him, he's going to have his way of getting you back on track. Okay, he's going to have his way of getting you right back on track to follow him. All right, to follow him. All right, and then one note that I put, I said, like, God is my father. He loves me. He wants me to follow him, seek him, live for him. So that was a little side note that I wrote down here as I was reading over this. Okay, but think about it. God is like your parents or your guardian, teaching you right from wrong. Okay. All right. And so here's the next part. It says, God will follow. All right. God will follow. And so we're still concentrating on Jeremiah, the 32nd chapter, but this time we're reading a little bit further from the 42nd through the 44th verse. So let's look at this real quickly to see what the rest of the story has said about this incident here. This is what the Lord says. As I have brought all this great calamity on this people, so I will give them all the prosperity I have promised them. Once more fields will be bought in this land of which you say it is a desolate waste without people or animals, for it has been given unto the hands of the Babylonians. Fields will be bought for silver, and deeds will be signed, sealed, and witnessed in the territory of Benjamin, in the villages around Jerusalem, in the towns of Judah, and in the towns of the hill country of the western foothills and of the Negev, because I will restore their fortunes, declares the Lord. He says it right there. I will restore their fortunes, that he's going to make it work. He's going to restore them. Okay, after he put a little whipping on them, now he's going to restore them to show him his love. Okay. All right. And then it says there in the passage that God always keeps his promises. His judgment of Judah will be redemptive, and his promises were just as sure as the judgment he was bringing on them. The land will be restored and life will return to normal. Okay. But in the beginning phases, these people couldn't see all of this. With all this chaos, the town, the cities have been invaded, they have been conquered. It was just chaos everywhere. Men, women, children, the old, the young, everybody was feeling the wrath of war. Dying, no place to stay, shelter all torn up, no food. It was pretty bad. They have been conquered by the Babylonians. Conquered. But at the end of the story, God got a good ending, that he's going to restore them. All right, he's going to restore them. And so the final 3 verses of Jeremiah, the 32nd chapter, echo the symbol that God had commanded Jeremiah to use, the purchase of land. God promised that land would once again be bought and sold, that normal business matters would resume. He spoke of Jerusalem and the land around it, and even the southern desert regions known as the Nev, the Hebrew word for the south. No matter how discouraged they became during the time of exile, they still had the promise of God. When we are discouraged by our current situation and it seems that there is no hope in sight, we can remember that God never forgets his own. We can trust that he always keeps his promises to us. Our full restoration will come as we inhabit the New Jerusalem with him in eternity. All right. So through the midst of all this chaos, God said he's going to still give you what he promised you. All right. Because that's the type of God he is. He's not like man that'll sit there and go back on his word. Well, I don't know. No, not God. Not God. And so here's the question here. It says, what promises of God are you clinging to right now? How can you use this time to grow closer to God? So maybe you have asked God for something, you've been praying for God, and now it's like you're just waiting around. You're waiting. So how can you use this time to grow closer to God? What are some things that you could do while you're waiting on this prayer to be answered? You're waiting for this prayer to be filled, because this is a waiting period. Okay. And sometimes it takes long. It takes a long time. So one thing that you could do in the meantime, while you're waiting, you can read the scriptures more. Ask God to send you different scriptures to read so you can have a better understanding about what's going on with your own personal situation. You can pray to God about your situation. You can study more about the scriptures. You can help others. You can continue on paying your tithes, going to church, attending Bible study, just sharing the good news, even though you are in the midst of waiting on a prayer to be answered. Like you got something that's going on and it's really, really bothering you. Okay. It really, really bothers you. Like your mind is just constantly on it. You're worried about it. You just can't stay focused. You can't concentrate. You can't sleep at night. You'll just be tossing and turning and just worrying. Sometimes you just find yourself crying about it. And like, Lord, are you listening to me? Or do you hear my prayer, Lord? Like I'm begging and I'm pleading. And in the midst of it, God is working it out. He is working it out, because sometimes it takes a long, long time for God to come in and answer a prayer. But God is working things out behind the scenes. He is working it out. Okay. And so you can talk to some of your family members or your coworkers and friends, and some of them will probably tell you that God works on his time, but when he shows up, he will show out and everything is going to work out fine. Because some people got health problems that they're dealing with. They've been praying for God to heal them, and they're in their waiting period now. They're just waiting. Somebody probably got cancer or something and going back and forth to the doctor for treatments and chemo. And it's like, when am I going to get better? When am I going to get better? And it's just a waiting period. They just waiting and waiting and waiting. And in that midst of waiting, sometimes it does get frustrating. All right. Maybe you're waiting on a child to get off of drugs and you just waiting. Maybe you're waiting on your husband to stop being an alcoholic and you're just waiting. You're just waiting. It's just all kinds of situations that people are dealing with. And there's a period where we have to wait. We have to wait and we have to be patient. And it does get hard because you want to do it your way. You want to handle it your way. But that's when you pray and ask God what to do. You pray and ask him. And yes, it's hard. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Yes, it's hard because I, for one, know. I had to wait 10 years for a prayer to be answered. 10 years that I was praying for something. And it got hard. I would be crying all the time, not sleeping at night, tossing and turning, got to get up and go to work and just tired. And the moment I sit down, trying to watch TV, that problem right there. It just right there, just occupying. And that's when I would try to find something to do so that I wouldn't be thinking about it. I wouldn't be focusing on it. But that problem was always just right there, just lingering right there. That's right there. Okay. And it was a waiting period. But that's when you got to pray and ask God to show you the right way and what to do. Despite what people might be saying, because people probably going to be talking about, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to, that's when you got to you stay focused on the Lord and pray to God. Because people ask me all the time, how in the world did you handle this? And all I can say is God, because I should have been in the nut house right now. Really, I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I was the verge of being in the crazy house. But God, the one that kept me sane. Nobody else did that. God did that. Okay. But I'll talk about that, another time, about my story, about some things that I dealt with. But right now, I just want to focus on y'all and, to help y'all out. Okay. But we will get to that, talking about things on a more personal note. All right. So what is God saying to us? God's people are called to live in hope. Even when we wander far from God's will and find ourselves living through catastrophic circumstances, God still has a plan for restoration. He patiently desires our return and waits to be gracious to us. Sometimes there is a season of pain to be endured before reconciliation can happen, but in God's plan, pain can be redemptive. Do not let hardships or suffering turn you away from the only one who can heal you. In time, you will see his saving power at work in your life. You will see it. All right, so living it out. If you know someone who is suffering the consequences of bad choices or who has walked away from God, take time to pray for that person right now. Look for an opportunity to speak life into someone's situation, to show them that God still cares deeply about them and wants to restore them. And reflect on the promises of God this week and rejoice that he provides all that you need. So living it out. And for further study on this week here about salvation and divine favor, you can look at the offspring promise in the book of Genesis, the 22nd chapter, the 15th through the 18th verse. Everlasting kingdom promise, 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, 8th through the 17th verse. Payment for salvation promise, Isaiah, the 53rd chapter, 4th through the 12th verse. The promise offspring, Galatians, the 3rd chapter, the 15th through the 22nd verse. The eternal king, Hebrews, the 1st chapter, the 5th through the 13th verse. And payment made for salvation, 1 Peter, the 1st chapter, the 18th through the 21st verse. All right, so this is concluding lesson 9, salvation and divine favor promise. And it focuses on Jeremiah. And the central truth again, God restores lives that have been broken by sin. So we all are guilty of it, but God will restore us no matter what it is, no matter how bad you think it is. God can restore you. Just come to him. All right, so see y'all next time. And next time we'll be focusing on lesson 10 next time. That's going to talk about Ezekiel. All right, so we're going to look at Ezekiel story the next time. All right.